They didn't even bother to hide it this time. The text came at 9:13 a.m. from my older brother, Grant. "Don't come to Dad's birthday. You're an embarrassment. If I see you near the venue, I'll call security. Hi, I'm Sarah Langford, eldest daughter of Victor Langford, CEO of Langford Motors, and public family disgrace since the day I turned down a corner office and six-figure salary to go play engineer." They said I was wasting my name, squandering my chances, throwing away a legacy built by generations. What they never asked was what I'd been building instead. I looked up at the framed magazine cover hanging above my desk. Forbes Tech, Eden Rhodes, the silent force behind the EV revolution. They didn't know Eden Rhodes was me. Sarah Langford, working under my mother's name, had built one of the most disruptive clean energy startups in the country, without help from any Langford. And now, on my father's 65th birthday, the world would finally know who Eden Rhodes really was. Not because I wanted revenge, but because it was time the people who dismissed me learned that silence isn't weakness. Sometimes, it's just the sound of something powerful being built. Tonight, I wasn't just crashing a party. I was rewriting the story they tried to erase me from. The call from Everett Hale came just after dawn, crisp and to the point. "We're set for the announcement tonight. The Langford board has no idea it's Eden Tech that's taking over the partnership, and I'd like you to be there, Sarah, in person." My heart didn't race. It didn't need to. I'd spent too long preparing for this. "You know I'll be walking into a firestorm," I said quietly. "Which is exactly why you should walk in first," he replied. "Let them burn." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because there was something poetic in the way this moment had found its way back to me, through the front door they once slammed shut. It wasn't about vengeance. Not really. I didn't need them to suffer. I just needed them to see who I'd become without their permission, without their money, without their validation. That afternoon, I stood in front of my closet. No designer dress, no diamonds, just a fitted black sheath, low heels, and my mother's necklace. Still etched, still gleaming. I clipped my badge from the Eden Tech lab inside my purse. If anyone asked, it was my shield, my proof. On the way to the Langford estate, I thought about the last time I'd seen my father face to face. He'd told me, "You're not built for this world, Sarah. Not tough enough, not sharp enough." I was 24. I had nodded, not because I believed him, but because I knew nothing I said then would change anything. That was the last time he'd looked me in the eye. Since then, I'd become invisible. Until tonight. I arrived just before sunset. The Langford mansion was glowing gold with string lights and laughter, music drifting across the wide lawn. Servers carried flutes of champagne and hand-carved hors d'oeuvres to people wearing tailored suits and curated smiles. I paused at the entrance where my name, my family name, was engraved into the archway. It hadn't felt like mine in years. At the check-in table stood Mara, my half-sister, all gloss and blonde ambition, dressed in something tight, holding a champagne glass like it was part of her birthright. Her eyes widened when she saw me. "Sarah?" she said, confused and defensive in the same breath. "You're not on the guest list." "No," I said calmly, handing over a card. "But Mr. Everett Hale called ahead. I'm expected." She scanned the name, Eden Rhodes. I watched the blood drain from her face. "Eden. You're Eden Rhodes?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She stumbled over her words, tapping on her earpiece, trying to call someone. Grant, probably. But I was already walking inside. The room was full. Investors, journalists, board members. And in the center of it all, my father, standing under a banner that read, "Happy 65th, Victor Langford," beaming like the king of an empire. He hadn't seen me yet. But he would. And I was done being invisible. I didn't rush. I walked slowly, deliberately, past couples clinking glasses and board members whispering about stock projections, until I reached the edge of the ballroom. I blended just enough. Simple dress, practiced posture. But the energy shifted around me. People noticed. They just didn't know why. Not yet. Grant spotted me first. He froze mid-conversation with a VP from Halcyon Motors. his face hardening as a recognition set in. His eyes narrowed, his jaw flexed. He cut across the room like a missile. "You were told not to come," he hissed, voice low but tight with fury. "Good evening to you too, Grant." I sipped champagne. "You're looking very predictable." "I'm calling security," he snapped, reaching into his pocket. "No need," I said, glancing toward the main entrance. "Mr. Hale should be here in about 1 minute. He personally invited me." Grant stopped. The arrogance drained into uncertainty. "Everett Hale?" he asked, incredulous. "Why would he—" He didn't finish, because just then the music shifted. Everett Hale entered. No fanfare, just presence. The kind of presence that silences a room without raising a word. 60 years old, tailored gray suit, silver hair, and sharper eyes than any executive I'd ever met. He walked past the buffet, the bar, the mingling elite, and made a beeline, toward me. Victor Langford, catching sight of him, surged forward, hand extended. "Mr. Hale!" he boomed, voice slick with charm. "It's an honor." Everett didn't stop, didn't shake, didn't glance. He walked right by my father, straight to me. "Miss Rhodes," he said with a smile, extending his hand, "it's a privilege to finally meet you in person." The silence cracked like glass. I took his hand. My father stared, first in confusion, then dawning realization, then horror. Mara dropped her glass. It shattered across marble. Claudia gasped. Grant was still frozen, half reaching for his phone like it could save him. "You're Eden Rhodes?" Victor finally managed, voice small. "You're her." I turned to him. "No, I'm your daughter, Sarah Langford. Eden Rhodes is the name I built when no one wanted mine." The words hit harder than any slap. Everett gave me space. He could feel what this moment was. Victor stumbled back. "You built Eden Tech?" "Yes." "The battery patents, the EV platform, the new thermal shielding tech?" "All mine." Grant found his voice. "You've been doing this while we thought you were—" "Floundering?" I finished for him. "That's what you all assumed, right? That I walked away and failed?" Victor was shaking his head. "Why didn't you tell us?" "Because you didn't ask. Because when I tried 5 years ago, you told me to learn real business. So I did, just not from you." Everett stepped in gently. "Shall we proceed?" Victor turned sharply. "Proceed with what?" Everett's voice was calm but firm. "With the announcement. Eden Tech is acquiring a controlling stake in Langford Motors. Miss Langford will assume the role of CEO, effective immediately." Murmurs rippled through the crowd like electricity. Claudia rushed forward. "Victor, you can't let this happen. She'll destroy everything." "I'm saving it," I said flatly. "Your legacy is sinking. Sales are down. Innovation stalled. Langford Motors has 3 quarters left max before bankruptcy. What I'm offering is not revenge. It's rescue." Victor looked at Everett, pleading. "You can't do this." "I already did," Everett said. "But it was her condition. Langford gets first rights before we take this to your competitors." Grant barked. "She's bluffing." I pulled up my phone and opened a secured folder. Full patent filings, tech demos, third-party validations. The room fell back into silence. Victor stepped forward slowly, eyes flicking between the screen and my face. This is real?" "Yes," I said quietly. "And it always was. You just never looked close enough." He nodded once, like something inside him had given way. "Where do I sign?" I reached into my bag and handed him the folder Everett had given me earlier. The pen clicked loud as thunder in that hushed room. He signed. Grant stormed out, muttering curses. Claudia turned away, livid. Mara just stood there, mouth slightly open, mascara starting to smear. Everett raised a glass. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the new CEO of Langford Eden Technologies, Miss Sarah Langford." Some clapped, some whispered, some stared. But none of them could look away, and none of them would ever forget this moment. After the announcement, the room slowly resumed motion, but nothing felt the same. The music was still playing, the drinks still flowing, but the energy had shifted. I could feel it in the way people avoided my eyes, or stared a moment too long, searching for the Sarah Langford they thought they knew. Victor lingered by the bar, dazed. His hands trembled slightly as he sipped from a now warm glass of bourbon. I watched him silently, letting him sit with the weight of what just happened. He wasn't the only one unraveling. Claudia approached, sharp as ever. "You've humiliated him," she hissed. "On his birthday, in front of everyone." "I gave him a lifeline," I replied coolly. "In front of everyone." "He built this company from nothing." "No," I corrected. "He inherited it from his father, then nearly ran it into the ground while ignoring the future." She opened her mouth, but I stepped closer. "Claudia, this was never about you. You married into a legacy. I built one." Her jaw tensed, but she didn't argue. Behind her, Grant reappeared, flushed with anger. "You think you've won, but this won't last," he spat. "The board will never follow you. You don't know the industry. You don't know us." "I know exactly what I'm doing," I said. "And I know what I'm not doing, asking for your approval. You could have come back years ago, joined us. We would have made room." "No, Grant, you would have made excuses, like you always do." He turned to Victor, looking for backup. "Dad." Victor raised a hand. "Enough." It was quiet, but it landed like thunder. Grant stopped, stunned. Claudia looked at her husband like she didn't recognize him. Victor faced me. "I was wrong," he said. Just that. No stammering, no performance. Just those 3 words. Then he added, "About you, about everything." "I know." He looked older now, smaller somehow. "I should have listened. You tried to show me. I wouldn't even look." "You told me to stop playing engineer and learn business," I said gently. "So I did." He let out a hollow laugh, then covered his face for a moment. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. "Can you forgive me?" I didn't answer right away. The silence stretched. Eventually I said, "That depends. Are you willing to learn from me now?" He nodded. And in that moment, I believed him. This wasn't about power anymore. It was about rebuilding something, on my terms. Later, when the crowd began to thin, I stood alone at the edge of the terrace, the cool night air brushing against my skin. Everett joined me, silent for a while. "You handled that well," he said eventually. "I wasn't sure I would." "I was." I turned to him. "Why'd you take the risk? Partnering with me before you even knew who I really was?" He smiled. "Because I didn't care about your name. I cared about your mind. The rest just made the story better." We clinked glasses. No toasts, no promises, just mutual understanding. Inside, the Langfords were still reeling. Outside, I was finally breathing. I arrived at Langford Motors the next morning just after 7. The halls were quiet, still echoing with the remnants of last night's disruption. My name badge now read Sarah Langford, CEO, and the receptionist barely blinked as she waved me through. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt familiar. The executive wing was oddly silent. Grant's office was dark, its contents already stripped away. Claudia's immaculate space was empty too, save for a lingering trace of expensive perfume. They hadn't just packed up, they'd retreated. I stopped in front of the CEO's office, once my father's sanctum. 5 years ago, I wouldn't have dared touch the doorknob, but now the door opened with a quiet assurance. No key, no guards, no permission needed. The office was filled with light. Morning sun poured through the tall windows, warming the wood grain of the desk where countless decisions, some brilliant, some disastrous, had been made. I stood still for a moment, just breathing it in. This wasn't a throne, it wasn't a prize. It was a place to build. A small, unmarked box sat at the center of the desk. I opened it slowly. Inside was a well-worn engineering textbook. The spine cracked softly in my hands, pages yellowed, cover softened by time. My heart caught in my chest as I recognized it. My mother's. I flipped to the inside cover, and there it was. In her familiar looping script, "For Sarah, who will change the world her own way." Eleanor Rhodes Langford. I closed the book and held it to my chest. She had always seen something in me the others didn't. Not a replacement, not a disappointment, just possibility. And here, in this office they never thought I'd belong to, she was still the voice that mattered most. I placed the book on the center shelf behind me. No awards, no framed press clippings, just that one artifact, quiet, certain. Through the window, I watched a crew mount the final letters onto the glass sign outside. Langford Eden Technologies. It was more than a merger of names. It was a declaration. The future wouldn't be inherited, it would be created. I didn't feel victorious. I felt aligned. They had tried to shut me out, convinced the best way to control me was to ignore me. And still, I rose. Not out of spite, but out of purpose. The past was behind me. The work was ahead. And for the first time in years, I wasn't chasing anything. I was exactly where I was supposed to be. That evening, I found my father in the prototype lab. Not his office, not the boardroom. The lab. He was sitting on a stool, staring at one of the early Eden Tech battery models. Casing half open, notes scribbled around it. He didn't hear me walk in. "I remember when you used to laugh at my sketches," I said gently. He looked up slowly. "I wasn't laughing at the work. I was afraid of what it meant if you were right." I leaned against the table beside him. "You didn't want a daughter who proved you wrong?" I didn't want to admit I'd spent a lifetime ignoring the smartest person in the room. It wasn't an apology, but it was something real. "I found Mom's book," I said, "in my office." His eyes softened. She used to carry that everywhere, said it reminded her that ideas were more important than approval. I smiled. "Sounds like her." "I think she would have been proud," he added, voice low. I looked at him, really looked, and for the first time I didn't feel anger. I just saw a man who'd finally begun to understand what he'd missed. "I'm not asking you to fix what's broken," I said. "That's not your job anymore. But if you want to help build what's next, there's space for that." He nodded. "I'd like that." We sat in silence for a few minutes, just listening to the quiet hum of the machines that would soon carry the technology I once pitched to a room that laughed me out. Sometimes revenge comes in the form of rage, but sometimes the most powerful revenge is transformation. Not loud, not cruel, just undeniable. I didn't destroy the people who tried to erase me. I outlived their narrative, and now I was writing my own. A week later, I stood before the entire staff at our first all-hands meeting under the new name, Langford Eden Technologies. Our tagline gleamed across the back wall, "Powering the future built from truth." No one clapped because they had to. They clapped because they believed. As I stepped down from the stage, I caught my reflection in the glass, my mother's pendant glinting at my throat, the same steady look in my eyes that she once wore when no one listened to her either. The circle hadn't closed. It had evolved, and I was just getting started. Nobody wants a single mom with baggage. That's what my sister said, right there, at her own wedding, into the microphone, smiling. Hi, I'm Calista Vane, 34 years old, single mom, and an accountant in a small town called Charleston, South Carolina. My son Eli is 10, smart, gentle, fiercely kind, everything I ever wanted to raise in a world that's often too cruel. I've learned to keep my head down, to survive quiet rooms and cold shoulders, especially from my own family. But that day, standing in a ballroom full of polished people, hearing my sister laugh as she mocked my life in front of everyone, I finally hit the limit. What she didn't know, though, was that the man she was about to marry already knew the real me, long before he ever met her, and he had his own story to tell. I've always liked numbers. They don't lie, don't judge. People, on the other hand, a different story. That's why my tiny accounting office above a bookstore in Charleston felt like home. Just me, my calculator, and Eli's doodles taped on the filing cabinet. Mom, you almost done? Eli poked his head in, cheeks pink from soccer. He was 10, all elbows and energy, with a smile that made hard days easier. 5 minutes, I said, typing one last line. Homework? Spelling's done, but I need help with the American Revolution. I laughed. Of course you do. On the walk home, the air smelled like sea salt and blooming azaleas. Charleston was beautiful in spring, but I barely noticed anymore. My head was full of numbers and family obligations, especially the latest one, dinner at my mother's house with my sister Serena and her fiancé. My mother, Darlene, didn't ask if we could come. She commanded it. She always had a way of making us feel like guests in our own lives. Serena was the golden girl, with her glossy hair and perfect life. And now, she was marrying Julian Renner, a financial advisor with a Harvard degree and a face fit for a billboard. When Eli and I arrived, Darlene opened the door with her usual tight smile. You're late. We're on time, I replied. Inside, everything was perfectly curated. Lavender candles, lamb roast, and carefully chilled wine. Serena was perched on the couch like a queen. She barely looked at Eli. Then Julian stood and offered his hand. Nice to meet you. His eyes, hazel, warm, met mine, and something flickered. Familiarity. He crouched slightly. What grade are you in? 5th, Eli said. Best year. My volcano exploded at the science fair. You'll love it. Eli laughed. No one in that house ever made him feel seen. But Julian did. Serena's voice cut through. You're not wearing that to the wedding, right? I glanced at my blouse and slacks. It's just dinner. Darlene added. We didn't ask you to be a bridesmaid, dear. With your situation. That word, situation. Like my life was a stain on their perfection. I stayed quiet, nails pressing into my palm. Julian noticed, his jaw tight. Dinner was long, filled with wedding talk and backhanded comments. But Eli held my hand under the table. He always knew when I needed grounding. Later, as I organized RSVP cards in Darlene's study, Julian walked in with 2 coffees. You're basically running this whole wedding, he said. Someone has to. He studied me. Did you ever volunteer at Memorial Children's Hospital? I froze. Yes, a long time ago. My sister Lauren was there. You read to her, sang to her. She said you made the hospital feel safe. My breath caught. She called me Sunshine Girl. He nodded slowly. That was you. Just like that, the air changed. He wasn't just Serena's fiancé anymore. He was the boy who once watched his sister fade away and remembered the girl who made her smile. After that night in my mother's study, something shifted. Julian started showing up in small ways. A thank you text after I fixed the florist's order. A quick call to double-check the reception layout. He always made it seem casual, businesslike. But I wasn't stupid. I saw the way he lingered when we spoke. The soft edge in his voice when he asked about Eli. And most of all, I saw how Serena didn't notice. Or maybe she didn't care. Julian was just another accessory to her, presentable, educated, lucrative. 2 weeks before the wedding, the pressure hit a fever pitch. The dress fittings, seating charts, guest list corrections, all dumped onto me without a single please or thank you. My evenings disappeared into color-coded spreadsheets and napkin sample deliveries. And when I wasn't solving Serena's wedding meltdowns, I was helping Eli build his science project Volcano. We worked at the kitchen table together, his hands covered in glue and baking soda. "You're doing too much, Mom," he said one night. I paused. "What makes you say that?" He shrugged. "You're always tired. You haven't smiled for real in a while." I smiled then, not because he was wrong, but because he saw me. My 10-year-old saw what no one else in my family cared to notice. The next day, Julian called. "Can we meet?" he asked. "Somewhere quiet. I promise it's not about place cards." We met at a coffee shop near the marina, where the scent of salt and espresso mingled in the air. He looked tired but resolute. "I need to ask you something," he said after we sat, "and I know it's going to be complicated." "Go ahead," I said, wrapping my hands around the mug. "I want you to be my maid of honor." I blinked. "That's not how it works. Serena didn't even ask me to be a bridesmaid." "I know," he said quickly. "She wouldn't. But I told her I want this. You've done everything already, and this... it feels right." I stared at him. "Julian, you're marrying my sister." He leaned in. "I thought I knew her. I thought I knew what I needed. Someone polished. Someone loud enough to drown out the grief. But then I saw you again, and it reminded me of what mattered." I shook my head, heart racing. "This isn't about me." "Yes, it is," he said softly. "Lauren loved you, and I see why." I didn't say yes, I couldn't, but I didn't say no either. That night, my phone rang. My mother's name flashed on screen. "What were you thinking?" She hissed before I could even speak. "Serena is distraught. You had to make this about you, didn't you?" "I didn't ask for anything," I replied, voice even. "Julian did. You always play the victim. Just don't ruin her day." "I won't, but if she doesn't want me there, she can say so." There was a long pause. "You can't back out now. Julian's told everyone. Don't make a scene." I hung up without another word. Eli was on the couch, building a Lego space station. "Was that Grandma?" he asked without looking up. "Yeah." "She mean again?" I hesitated. "Let's just say, not very nice." He nodded. "Then don't listen. You always tell me to ignore people who are wrong." I chuckled despite myself. "Guess I better start taking my own advice." In the days leading up to the wedding, Serena avoided me completely. No texts, no calls, no passive-aggressive emails, which was almost eerie. I thought about pulling out a dozen times, but then I'd remember the look on Julian's face, or the way Lauren used to smile when Eli handed her a drawing. There were moments when I caught Julian watching me, like he was trying to solve a puzzle he already knew the answer to. There was no flirting, no touching, no inappropriate glances. Just awareness, like we were both waiting for something neither of us had the nerve to name. And beneath all of it, there was Eli. At his next soccer game, Julian showed up unexpectedly, standing on the sidelines next to me. "Didn't know you were into youth sports," I said. "I'm into seeing kids who matter being supported," he said simply. Eli scored a goal that day. He ran straight to us, beaming. And Julian knelt to give him a high five like it was the most natural thing in the world. That night, as I tucked Eli into bed, he whispered, "Is Julian going to be around more?" "Maybe," I said. "Why?" "I like him," he murmured. "He doesn't talk to me like I'm invisible." I kissed his forehead. "Me too, buddy." And just like that, something started to shift, not just in Julian or in me, but in the world around us. The day of the wedding was clear and warm, the kind of spring day Charleston was famous for: soft breeze, golden light, and the scent of jasmine in the air. Eli and I arrived early. He wore a navy suit and held my hand tightly, eyes wide with both excitement and unease. I wore a soft sky blue dress, simple, elegant, unassuming. I wasn't there to shine. I just wanted to survive. "You look awesome, Mom," Eli whispered. His words meant more than any compliment I could ever get from my family. Inside St. Andrew's Church, everything looked perfect. White roses, crystal chandeliers, every detail manicured to Serena's vision. Bridesmaids flitted around the dressing room, adjusting straps and sipping champagne. Serena stood at the center of it all in her custom gown, sparkling from head to toe, her expression sharp and unreadable. She barely looked at me. "Try not to trip when we walk down the aisle." "Good to see you too," I said, keeping my tone even. Darlene sat in the corner, already critiquing the photographer's angles. When she caught sight of me, she murmured, "That dress. Very you." I didn't flinch. I'd been called plain my entire life. It didn't sting anymore. The ceremony passed in a blur. I walked behind Serena, held her bouquet, adjusted her veil. I performed every duty with quiet grace, not for her, but for myself, for Eli, who sat in the front pew beside Julian's father, legs swinging nervously, face shining with pride every time our eyes met, for Julian, who caught my gaze from the altar and gave me the smallest nod, steady, warm. But nothing prepared me for what came next. The reception was held in a grand ballroom at the Charleston Opera House. High ceilings, soft candlelight, and champagne towers glittered under crystal lighting. It was extravagant and cold, like most things my family valued. Dinner had just been served when Serena took the microphone. "I want to thank everyone for coming today," she said sweetly, "especially my amazing bridal party, and of course my maid of honor, Callista." There was polite applause. I nodded graciously. Then her voice shifted, just a hair, but I recognized that edge. "And I really admire her," she continued, the smile tightening. "For raising a child alone, that takes courage, especially when no one's ever really loved you." The room stilled. A few people chuckled uncomfortably. "She's still on the market, folks," Serena added, laughing. "Anyone looking for secondhand goods with a bonus kid?" Laughter cut through the ballroom. Darlene laughed too, loudly. My stomach twisted. Eli's small hand found mine under the table. He was trembling. I stood up. I had to get him out of there. Out of that room. Out of that cruelty. Then a chair scraped loudly behind me. Julian stood. The room fell silent again. He walked to Serena and gently took the microphone from her hand. "I need to say something," he said, voice firm and low. Serena laughed awkwardly. "Julian, what are you—" He held up a hand. She froze. "This was supposed to be my wedding," he said, "but tonight reminded me that no amount of money, flowers, or polished veneers can hide the truth." Gasps spread across the room. He turned and looked at me. "Callista and I didn't just meet last month. We met years ago at Memorial Children's Hospital. My sister Lauren was dying. Callista was the one who sat with her, read to her, made her laugh. She was our light during the darkest time." I froze. Eli squeezed my hand harder. His eyes were wide. "She brought her son, too," Julian continued. "Little Eli, he drew stars and planets for Lauren. She kept everyone by her bed. She called him her little astronaut." The ballroom was dead silent. Julian turned back to the crowd. "So when I heard what was said here tonight, about Callista, about Eli, I knew I couldn't go through with this." Serena's jaw dropped. "You don't mean that." Julian looked at her without blinking. "I absolutely do. I'm calling off the wedding." Gasps again. A glass shattered somewhere in the back. Darlene stood up, pale as a ghost. "You don't know what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing," Julian said. "Send me the bill." Then he walked to Eli, got down on one knee. "Thank you," he said, "for being the light you are." Eli blinked, unsure, but nodded. Julian stood and turned to me. "Come with me?" I didn't move right away. Everything felt frozen, like my entire life had been leading to this one impossible moment. But then I took his hand. And together we walked out, past Serena's tears, past my mother's glare, past every person who ever made me feel less. We didn't stop until we were outside, under the Charleston stars. Julian hailed a cab. "I know a place," he said, "quiet, by the water." The restaurant he took us to was a little seafood shack overlooking the harbor. Wooden deck, fairy lights, the sound of waves crashing nearby. For the first time all day, I could breathe. We didn't say much during the meal. Eli colored on a napkin. Julian stared out at the water. Finally, he spoke. I'm sorry. For what? I asked. For the speech, the mess, everything. You don't apologize for telling the truth, I said. He nodded. After Lauren died, I lost myself. Serena was noise. I thought that's what I needed. But it wasn't, I said. No, he whispered. It wasn't. His phone buzzed on the table. Serena's name lit up the screen. He silenced it. She's going to keep calling, I said quietly. She'll hear from my lawyer, he said. Eli looked up then. Julian? Yeah, buddy? Remember those drawings, the stars I made for the lady in the hospital? Julian smiled. That was my sister. She loved them. She said I was funny, Eli said. You were her hero, Julian replied. The waves rolled in, and for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like peace. The next morning, we visited Lauren's grave. The cemetery was quiet, tucked between tall pines and overlooking the bay. Julian walked slowly, white daisies in one hand and a small stone in the other, painted with a yellow sun and stars, edges worn with time. Eli walked beside him, hands in his coat pockets. This was hers? He asked, eyeing the stone. Julian nodded. She kept it by her bed. We reached the marker, simple, clean, engraved with beloved. Julian knelt and placed the flowers, then gently set the stone beside them. She always said your drawings made her feel brave. Eli stared. I didn't think she'd remember me. She never forgot you. I stood behind them, heart heavy but soft. It didn't feel like grief. It felt like closure. Julian stood and reached for my hand. I let him take it. A year later, my life had changed in ways I never thought possible. I opened a small financial office downtown, Vane Financial Services. The name had been Julian's idea. You built this, he said. Let them know it. The space was warm, honest, not fancy, but real. On the wall behind my desk hung Eli's latest drawing, a rocket ship blasting through a field of stars. Business was steady, word spread. People came not just for advice, but for someone who listened. At home, Eli thrived. He was stronger now, more sure of himself. He'd become the kind of kid who stood up for others, not just himself. And Julian? He never missed a single game, or dinner, or bedtime story. We weren't married, not yet. But we were a family. As for Serena and my mother, Darlene, they faded into the background. Serena's career never recovered from the wedding scandal. People talked, jobs stopped calling. She moved away quietly, without a word. My mother tried to reach out. Voicemails, awkward apology cards, but I didn't answer. I had nothing cruel to say. I just had nothing left for them. Some endings don't need revenge. Just silence. It was Christmas Eve when Julian brought out the box. Eli was asleep on the couch, the glow of tree lights dancing on his face. Julian and I sat by the fire, cocoa in hand. This belonged to Lauren, he said, opening the lid. Inside sat a vintage emerald ring. She told me to give it to someone who reminded me what love means. That's you. Tears rose before I could speak. Callista, he said, will you marry me? I looked at the ring, at the boy asleep under the tree, at the man who saw me before I saw myself. Yes, I whispered. Outside, snow began to fall, light, gentle, like peace finally finding a place to land. There's something funny about healing. You don't notice it at first. It doesn't arrive with fanfare or fireworks. It's quieter than that, like a door you'd forgotten was ever locked suddenly swinging open. For years, I thought survival was the best I could hope for. I thought if I kept my head down, stayed useful, stayed silent, maybe I'd earn some scrap of grace. I thought love had to be earned through self-sacrifice, but I was wrong. Love, the kind that heals, the kind that lasts, is never about proving you're worthy. It's about being seen, exactly as you are, and still being chosen. When Serena mocked me at her wedding, I could have let it define me. I could have walked away, once again absorbing the cruelty my family had handed me for years. But I didn't, because that moment, public, humiliating, and awful, became something else. A mirror, a line in the sand. And on the other side of that line stood Julian, choosing not perfection, but truth. And standing beside us was Eli, my son, my anchor, my reason. I don't know what the future holds. I don't expect life to be easy just because I finally stepped into the light. But I do know this. I have a home now, not just the roof over our heads, but the space where we laugh, fight fair, and let each other be human. I have work that matters. A son who shines. A man who never asked me to shrink myself. Serena once called me secondhand. But secondhand means lived in, proven, resilient, and I'll take that any day over being shiny and hollow. To anyone listening, if you've ever been told you weren't enough, weren't wanted, weren't worthy, I'm here to say that was never the truth. You were always more than they saw. You were always worth choosing. I see you, and I hope one day you see yourself too. My name is Rowan Ashford, and 3 weeks ago I buried my only daughter. Her name was Rosie. She was 8 years old. She loved space documentaries, drawing rocket ships, and believed every pain could be softened by glitter stickers and banana pancakes. The morning of her funeral, I sat alone in my car outside the service home. The dress I wore still smelled like lilies from the wake, and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I stared at the last message from my sister. A single word. Okay. Not, I'm sorry. Not, I'll be there. Just, okay. Later that day, I found out why. My mother and my sister had moved forward with Celeste's housewarming party, the one she couldn't reschedule, the one that was apparently planned for weeks. They called Rosie's funeral, a goodbye to a child who suffered through 12 months of agony, a minor event. That was the moment something inside me cracked, not in the way things break and collapse, but in the way things break and sharpen. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I dialed my lawyer. This story isn't about grief. Not really. It's about what comes after. When the people you trusted the most choose celebration over your child's death, you learn exactly what kind of woman you are. And me? I learned I am not the woman who lets that go. I sat in my car for 40 minutes before I had the strength to open the door. The funeral home loomed in front of me, all dark wood and hushed windows, like it was built to swallow grief whole and leave nothing but silence behind. I wasn't avoiding going inside. Rosie was already there. Inside that building, inside a casket no child should ever be in. I just needed to feel something solid before I had to let go again. The phone buzzed in my lap. It was still open to the last text I had sent my family. Rosie passed. Funeral is Friday at 10. Celeste, my sister, had replied with one word. Okay. Not, I'm sorry. Not, I'll be there. Just that. Okay. I hadn't heard from my mother at all, until now. Her name lit up the screen like a curse. I didn't have the energy to hold the phone to my ear, so I hit speaker. Rowan, she said brightly, as though we were about to discuss brunch. I'm here, I said. My voice barely qualified as sound. There was a pause, and then, about the funeral. I knew. Instantly. It was like being dunked in ice. We can't make it, she said. We promised Celeste we'd help with the housewarming. It's been on the calendar for weeks. I stared out the windshield, through a blur of tears I didn't even realize had returned. Her housewarming, I repeated. It's her first home, Mom continued. You know how important that is to her. More important than Rosie's funeral. Don't be dramatic, she snapped, voice shifting from performative grief to condescension in a breath. You've had time to prepare. Rosie's been sick for a year. It's not like this was a surprise. I didn't answer her. I hung up. And then I called Celeste. She picked up after 2 rings, sounding annoyed. What is it? You're throwing a party on the day of my daughter's funeral. The date was set weeks ago, Rowan, she said flatly. She's already gone. She doesn't care what day she's buried. I'm alive, and I need to celebrate moving on. I felt the phone slip in my hand, my fingers suddenly foreign and numb. Rosie used to say the house Celeste was moving into, Grandma's old place, was her favorite. She loved the pink tile in the kitchen and the creaky steps that sounded like laughter if you stepped just right. She once said, if a house can make someone happy, maybe it should stay in the family. Now that house would host strangers drinking wine, while my daughter's casket lowered into the earth. I didn't answer Celeste. There was no language in existence that could meet her where she had chosen to stand. Inside the funeral home, the director greeted me gently. His eyes scanned the space behind me, as if expecting someone to follow. There was no one. Not a single family member came. The seats reserved for them stayed empty. The photos of Rosie lining the hallway, her in her superhero Halloween costume, her blowing out candles on her last birthday, felt like artifacts in a museum nobody cared to visit. At the gravesite, I stood alone. The wind was sharp. I said goodbye with no hand to hold, not even my mother's. Later that night, when the room was finally still, I sat on Rosie's bed, surrounded by the drawings she'd made for her nurses. Her favorite rock collection lined the windowsill. In that silence, I realized something. I was not just mourning my daughter. I was mourning the illusion of family. They weren't just absent. They had made a choice, and I was about to make mine. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I reread every message from my mother and Celeste, like picking at a scab just to feel the sting. At 6:03 a.m., I made the first call that mattered. Mr. Carlyle had been my grandmother's attorney for over 3 decades. He answered on the third ring, his voice gravelly and polite, the kind of tone reserved for widows and bad news. "I need to confirm something," I said, skipping pleasantries. "The house Celeste lives in, my grandmother's house, is it legally hers?" There was a pause. Papers shuffled. Then his voice returned, clear and firm. "No. The deed is still in your name, Miss Ashford. We never completed the transfer. I have it right here." I stared at the ceiling, blinking against the harsh morning light. "That can't be right," I said. "I gave her the keys last year." "Giving keys is not the same as giving property," he said gently. "You told me to put the paperwork on hold until things settled with Rosie's diagnosis." It came back in fragments. The week after Grandma's funeral, my mother and Wayne sitting at my kitchen table. Tea gone cold, their words soft and manipulative. "Celeste needs a fresh start," Mom had said, swirling her spoon with nervous energy. "She has nothing. You already have your own place," Wayne added. I was too hollow to argue, too overwhelmed by hospital schedules and fear and medical terms I still couldn't pronounce. "Fine," I'd said. "She can have it. We'll do the paperwork later." Later never came. Now I sat across from Mr. Carlyle, still dressed in black, my eyes raw, my fingers curled around the edge of his desk. 4 hours ago, I'd buried my child. Now I was unearthing something else entirely. "There's something else," he said. "You asked me last year to keep financial records for tax purposes. I pulled them." He slid a folder toward me. My name was on the tab. I opened it slowly. The first page was a bank statement, then another. 5 years of them, organized by month. Each one showed a consistent $2,000 transfer from my account to my mother's. Even during the months Rosie was in treatment, even when I was selling first editions to cover copays, even the month I maxed out my credit card to pay for anti-nausea meds. My stomach lurched. A separate page was clipped to the back. A car loan, my mother's name, $42,000, dated 1 month after Rosie's diagnosis. A Mercedes. I sat back, air gone from the room. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother. "Need extra this month. Insurance went up. How's Rosie?" I didn't respond. Instead, I opened Instagram. At the top of my feed, a photo posted just 2 hours earlier. My mother and Celeste, champagne glasses raised in my grandmother's kitchen. The caption read, "New beginnings, blessed new house, #gratitude, #family first." In the background, the antique mirror reflected their grinning faces. Mirror once belonging to the woman who raised me, who had intended that house as my daughter's second home. That was the final fracture. Not just their absence, not just their selfishness, but the smile behind it. This wasn't forgetfulness. It wasn't bad timing. It was cruelty. Planned, packaged, and shared with hashtags. I looked at Mr. Carlyle. "What would it take?" I asked, voice like steel, "to get them out?" He didn't blink. "I'll prepare the documents." And just like that, the part of me that used to flinch, used to rationalize, used to hope, died alongside my daughter. What remained would not be ignored. I gave myself until sundown. Until the sky turned the same lavender as Rosie's favorite sweater, I let myself fall apart one last time. I held her last drawing, half finished, colored outside the lines, and let the ache settle like fog in my chest. Then I stood up and called Mr. Carlyle. He had already started the eviction paperwork. The next call was to Noel. We hadn't talked since the funeral. He showed up that night with flash drives, printouts, and the guilt of a father who couldn't save his daughter, but might help her mother reclaim something. We worked at the kitchen table, now covered in evidence. Screenshots of texts, photos of hospital birthdays, the message where I told my family Rosie had passed. Every message was marked as raid. Celeste had replied, "Okay." Noel slid an email toward me. "From your landlord," he said. My mother had called him, claimed I was mentally unstable, and asked him to send my rent payments to her directly. He'd refused, thankfully, but now I had it in writing. "They're not just heartless," I said. "They're calculated." The next afternoon, I met 2 officers at my grandmother's house. I handed them the deed. "Miss Ashford," Officer Brennan said, "you're the legal owner?" "Yes, always have been." Celeste opened the door in yoga pants, holding a smoothie. Her face fell when she saw me. "This is my house," she snapped. "No," I said. "You just acted like it was." The officers explained the 48-hour notice. Celeste raged, screamed, cursed. The neighbors watched from porches. "I buried my daughter alone," I told her, "while you were drinking champagne in her memory." That night, I changed the locks. By morning, I had 4 security cameras mounted and cloud-connected. I didn't feel victorious. I felt something sharper, control. Celeste didn't leave quietly. 2 nights after the eviction notice was served, my security app buzzed just past midnight. The motion sensor triggered. Then the feed flickered into night vision. Her car was parked halfway up the driveway. She moved toward the back of the house, something metallic glinting in her hand. The camera caught her smashing the rear window with a swing of a bat. I didn't hesitate. I called 911. "My sister is breaking into my home. I have live footage. She was removed legally 2 days ago." By the time I heard the sirens, I was already outside, standing on the sidewalk, holding my phone, watching. The police cruiser pulled up. Officer Brennan stepped out. His face registered recognition, then something darker, confirmation. "She's inside?" he asked. I nodded. "Back window, you'll see." The officers approached the house. Celeste burst through the front door, still gripping the bat. Her hair was a mess, her face streaked with fury. "You called the cops on your own sister?" Officer Brennan moved in front of her. "Ma'am, drop the weapon." She let it fall, sneering. "This is ridiculous. This is my house." "No," I said, "it isn't, and the cameras prove it." Her eyes darted toward the blinking red lens mounted under the eaves. "I want to press charges," I told the officers. "Breaking and entering, vandalism." "She'll need to fill out a statement," Brennan said, as his partner read Celeste her rights. My sister thrashed once, but they didn't flinch. The neighbors watched silently from doorways and porches. No one spoke. The next morning, my mother showed up on my porch. Red-rimmed eyes. A purse clutched to her chest like armor. I didn't invite her in. "Rowan, this has gone too far. We're family." "No," I said. "You made a choice. You abandoned Rosie." "She wouldn't want this division." "Don't speak her name," I said, ice running through each word. Her grief mask slipped. Her voice turned hard. "You've always been difficult, so sensitive. Megan could lose her job over this. She should have thought of that before she shattered a window." That afternoon, a heavily edited video appeared on Facebook. Celeste stitching together pieces of security footage to make herself look like the victim. But the truth had its own voice. Rosie's teacher commented first. "I was at the funeral. I saw the front row, empty." Her hospice nurse chimed in. "I sat with Rowan during Rosie's final hours. Alone." Photos surfaced of the funeral, dozens of attendees, a row of empty family seats in the front. And then the county health department made a statement. "Miss Ashford has been placed on leave pending investigation." My phone rang again. My mother. "The church is asking questions," she said, nearly panicked. "Your father's sister saw the video. This could destroy our name." "It's not about your reputation," I said. "It's about what you did." She tried to blame me. Called me cruel. Said I'd regret cutting them off, but for once I didn't flinch. My lawyer confirmed, "Cease and desist letters have been delivered. They're legally barred from posting about you." "Good," I replied. "File the restraining orders next." "And the house?" "I'm donating it," I said, "to the Children's Cancer Foundation." A beat of silence, then, understood. That night, I walked through my grandmother's now empty living room. For the first time, it felt like mine. I reached behind a row of books and pulled out a folded piece of paper, Rosie's drawing, a stick figure with messy curls and a red cape. "My mommy is a superhero," it read in her handwriting. This time, the tears came not from grief, but from something cleaner, something like freedom. The day after I donated the house, I received a flurry of messages. Some were from distant relatives, those who had once reposted Celeste's video without question. Now they offered hesitant apologies, awkward explanations. Others didn't bother with excuses. They just said, "I'm sorry," and left it at that. I responded to none of them. Noel stopped by later that evening. He didn't bring flowers or casseroles, just a manila envelope and 2 coffees. "This is everything," he said, sliding the folder across my counter. Inside were screenshots, bank records, email chains, all the evidence we'd compiled, the paper trail showing how my mother and sister siphoned money from me while I was trying to save my daughter's life. "Anything else?" I asked. He nodded. "One more thing. The foundation raised over $12,000 in Rosie's name. People are still donating." I pressed the envelope to my chest. For once, it wasn't grief that choked me. It was something softer, something like pride. Later that night, as I cleaned out Rosie's art box, my phone buzzed again. Another certified letter, this one from Megan's lawyer. I opened it at the sink while the faucet ran. It was a ceasefire disguised as a threat, an offer to settle matters privately and avoid further damage to family reputation. I didn't laugh. I didn't cry. I just placed the letter in the shredder and went back to washing paintbrushes. That week, I took down the last of the sympathy cards. Not because I was moving on. I hate that phrase, but because I was done being frozen. Rosie's grave was still fresh, the grass not yet grown. I knelt by her headstone, brushing my fingers across the engraved letters. "I always taught you to be kind," I whispered, "but I should have taught you to stand your ground too. I'm learning, I promise." When I got home, a small box waited by my front door. Inside was a single daisy and a note in crooked handwriting. "I heard what your family did. You're not alone." It wasn't signed. It didn't need to be. I stood on the porch for a long time, watching the sun disappear behind the treetops. The air was cool, still. I didn't need anyone to tell me I'd done the right thing. Peace doesn't always come from forgiveness. Sometimes it comes from walking away with both hands empty and still feeling whole. The butter yellow paint in my new hallway caught the morning light. Rosie's drawings lined the walls. Rockets, capes, planets, flowers, all framed in simple wooden borders. I touched each one as I passed. A quiet ritual no one asked about. I didn't mind. Grief had taught me to cherish what no one else noticed. This wasn't rebuilding. This was beginning again. With different rules, different walls, and no one left to please but myself. On Tuesday evenings, I hosted a support group at the community center. 6 parents. All of us had buried a child. We didn't trade platitudes or timelines for moving on. We talked about the guilt, the silence, the way time had bent around our pain. And somehow, in that honesty, we stitched ourselves back together, thread by trembling thread. Noel came once. He sat in the back and didn't say a word, just listened. Later, he told me it was the first time he'd felt understood since the funeral. That was enough. One afternoon, the hospital coordinator called. "The families keep asking when you're coming back," she said. "They want more art days. Would you consider expanding the program to the satellite clinics?" I said yes, without hesitation. without fear. The next morning, I drove to Rosie's grave. The grass had begun to grow in, soft and bright. I knelt and laid a bunch of daisies beside her stone. "You made me stronger than I ever thought I could be," I whispered, "and I promise, I'm using every ounce of it." When I got home, a small envelope waited under my door. Inside was a drawing from Lily, the girl next door, a big red heart and stick figures holding hands beneath a tree. The note read, "Your flowers made me smile. I like your house." I taped it to the fridge. That evening, I sat on the porch, tea in hand, watching the stars blink alive above me. For the first time in a year, I didn't feel haunted by what I'd lost. I felt rooted by what I'd reclaimed. Peace doesn't always arrive like a sunrise. Sometimes it settles quietly, firm, unapologetic. I hadn't just survived them, I had eclipsed them.